Welcome to a journey where the most advanced science stands still before the inexplicable, analyzing a case that has shaken laboratories worldwide. Today, we explore the story of a scientist expert in genetics and DNA who received one of the most unusual missions of his career. It involved analyzing blood samples belonging to Carlo Acutis, the young blessed known globally as the cyber apostle of the Eucharist. By what began as a standard procedure for biological identification and dating soon transformed into an enigma that defies all logic. The scientist, accustomed to cold data and molecular sequences, stumbled upon something that modern medicine simply cannot explain. Join us as we reveal the details of this genetic analysis that has left the international scientific community in absolute silence. If you are passionate about these stories, where science crosses paths with faith, subscribe now so you don't miss any details. To understand the magnitude of this finding, it is essential to know the precision with which DNA laboratories work today. The sequencing process allows for the reading of a human being's complete map, revealing diseases, ancestors, and the degradation of time. In the case of Carlo Acutis, who passed away in 2006 due to fulminant leukemia, the blood tissue should have shown very clear signs of decay. The scientist in charge of the study expected to find a massive degradation of genetic material due to the passage of years and the disease. Type M3 leukemia usually destroys the integrity of blood cells, leaving a trail of molecular chaos throughout the organism. However, when observing the first samples under the high-resolution microscope, the expert noticed an anomaly that made no sense. The DNA structure seemed to be protected by an unknown mechanism that prevented the natural fragmentation characteristic of a deceased body. The scientist, whose identity was kept reserved during the initial phases, has worked on forensic cases of high global complexity. His experience told him that after more than a decade, the hydrogen bonds in the DNA should have been completely broken. But Carlo Acutis's blood presented a chemical stability that resembled that of a person who had just died recently. There was no trace of the expected autolysis, that process where cells digest themselves after the cessation of biological life. This was the first indication that this analysis would not be a common report to be filed away in a medical folder. The laboratory requested a second set of samples to rule out any type of external contamination or equipment error. The result was exactly the same: a clear, robust, and strangely vital genetic profile for the laws of biology. Acute promyelocytic leukemia, which ended Carlo's life, is known for its extreme aggressiveness at the cellular level. Medically, this implies that the patient's blood is subjected to extreme oxidative stress and massive destruction. The scientists searched for the genetic markers of the disease, which were present, confirming that the blood indeed belonged to the young man. However, the mystery was how those cells damaged by cancer remained in such a perfect state of physical preservation. There was no technical explanation for why the DNA had not dissolved in body fluids after 14 years of burial. The expert began to document what he called anomalous molecular stability, a term that barely scratched the surface of the phenomenon. If this scientific mystery is impacting you, give the video a like and help us spread this fascinating investigation. At this point in the study, a viability test was conducted on the nucleic acids present in the sample. The results indicated that Carlo Acutis's DNA retained a purity that facilitated a complete sequencing in record time. The scientist commented that it was as if time had stopped just before the process of decomposition began. No traces of chemical preservatives, formaldehyde, or any substance used in modern embalming processes were detected. Carlo's body was buried in a simple manner, which makes the condition of his blood even more incredible. The temperature and humidity parameters of the tomb in Assisi did not justify this level of biological conservation in any way. The laboratory was facing a blind spot, where the laws of thermodynamics seemed to have been selectively suspended. The scientists decided to expand the research team, consulting with pathologists and hematologists specialized in post-mortem tissue degradation. None of his colleagues could find a precedent in medical literature for a similar case of spontaneous genomic conservation. Hypotheses were raised about rare genetic mutations that could confer extreme resistance to the putrefaction of internal organs. However, Carlo's genetic map did not show any alteration that could explain such a physical phenomenon in his own blood. The mystery deepened every time a naturalistic theory was discarded due to the lack of empirical evidence in the tests. The expert realized he was facing a secret that transcended his academic training and years of experience. This case forced science to admit that there are variables we still cannot measure or fully understand. During the electrophoresis tests, the scientist observed that the DNA bands were clear and did not show the typical noise of degradation. That is, the pieces of the genetic puzzle were complete and in their exact place, as if they were recently taken samples. Forensic medicine establishes that DNA fragmentation begins a few hours after death due to endogenous enzymes. In Carlo's blood, these enzymes seem to have been deactivated or neutralized by a factor that science cannot identify. The technical report began to use words like inexplicable and mysterious, terms that scientists usually avoid at all costs. But given the physical evidence of intact DNA after 14 years, there was no other choice but to recognize the exception. Share this video with your friends who love science so they can also debate this find. The scientist revealed in academic circles that he felt a deep professional restlessness when processing these special samples. It was not about fear, but about a profound respect for a phenomenon that questioned the pillars of his medical specialty. DNA is the molecule of life, and seeing it so preserved in the context of death was a living paradox. The secret that the geneticist discovered was that Carlo's blood maintained a different vibrational signature than any other sample. Although this sounds like metaphysics, in terms of cellular quantum physics, it referred to the coherence of the molecular structures. This level of organization in dead matter is what medicine qualifies today as a totally impossible event. The case of Carlo Acutis thus became the strangest DNA study in all of modern history. An aspect that fascinated the team was the analysis of the white blood cells that had survived the process of leukemia. Under the microscope, some of these leukocytes maintained such a defined morphology that it seemed they were still in the process of defense. The scientist explained that this is medically impossible, as these cells are extremely fragile and destroy themselves quickly after death. Seeing the structure of a blood cell intact after so much time is like finding a perfect sandcastle after a storm. This finding reinforced the idea that Carlo's blood was protected by a phenomenon operating at a molecular scale. Many believe it is a sign of the young man's holiness, but for the scientist, it was an enigma requiring more data. Science did its job of observation, leaving the door open to other interpretations beyond the microscope. By concluding this first block, it is clear that Carlo Acutis's DNA is not common biological material for geneticists. The scientist's secret is the recognition that medicine has limits that were overcome by the reality of this young man. The analyzed blood tells a story of preservation that defies centuries and the natural processes of the earth in Assisi. The mystery continues, as each new test conducted only confirms the impossibility of what human eyes are seeing today. Carlo Acutis continues to surprise the world, not only for his spiritual miracles, but for the physical evidence he leaves in labs. Stay with us, because in the following part, we will analyze how the international community reacted to this report. Do not forget to activate the notification bell so you don't miss the continuation of this research. The news of the genetic report began to circulate through the corridors of the most prestigious universities in Europe and America. The scientist in charge of the tests received calls from colleagues who, at first, were skeptical of such biological claims. It was hard to believe that a tissue as volatile as blood could resist entropy so efficiently. However, when the raw sequencing data was shared, the skepticism transformed into deep scientific curiosity. DNA does not lie, and the sequences obtained were so clear they eliminated any possibility of error in the sampling. A peer review phase began where the soil conditions where Carlo rested were thoroughly analyzed. Every environmental variable was studied to try to find a logical answer to the longevity of those cells. But once again, nature seemed to have no conventional answer for the state of the young blessed. A technical detail the geneticist emphasized was the state of the telomeres in the DNA samples recovered from the body. Telomeres are the endings of chromosomes that usually wear out and disintegrate quickly after an individual's death. In Carlo's samples, these structures retained a definition that suggested a total interruption of the biological degradation clock. The scientist explained that to achieve this state, preservation in state-of-the-art liquid nitrogen chambers would be required. But Carlo was in a wooden coffin, underground, in an area with variable humidity depending on the seasons. This contrast between what science demands and what reality showed was the breaking point. If you want to know how technology tries to explain the divine, subscribe and activate notifications for more videos. We are facing a case where genetics seems to have been rewritten by a force we do not yet know. The study extended to the analysis of the plasma components that still remained in the recovered dry blood samples. Blood plasma contains proteins that usually denature and lose their three-dimensional shape within months after clinical death. In the laboratory, it was discovered that some of Carlo's specific proteins maintained their original folding, something considered medically impossible. The scientist revealed that this finding suggests that the putrefaction process was not just slow, but non-existent. This absence of protein degradation is what allows the DNA to remain anchored and protected within the nucleus. It is as if a molecular time capsule had wrapped every drop of the young man's blood before he was buried. The mystery was no longer just the preservation of the skin, but the preservation of life at a microscopic level. This report became a historical document that challenges current hematology and forensic textbooks. For weeks, the laboratory compared Carlo's DNA with databases of other patients who died from leukemia. They sought to determine if the disease itself could have generated some protective chemical substance in the patient's bloodstream. The results were negative, confirming that fulminant leukemia usually accelerates rather than slows down internal cellular destruction. Therefore, the cause of the conservation was not linked to the medical pathology, which increased the enigma. The scientist felt obliged to state that there was no known metabolic pathway that explained such a phenomenon of resistance. The secret of Carlo Acutis's blood became deeper as more technology was applied to the study. Every lab test was like a hammer hitting a wall of mystery that refused to break or yield. The scientific community began to speak of selective preservation, a term used when human logic simply falls short. Many wonder if Carlo's DNA could have been altered by some external factor during his short life. The scientist investigated his habits, his diet, and the environment where he grew up in Milan and other parts of Italy. He found nothing out of the ordinary that could justify such an amazing cellular resistance against death. Carlo was a normal young man, but his blood today tells a story that is anything but ordinary or common. The expert noted that even under exposure to intense laboratory lights, the DNA did not fragment easily. This stability against radiation and oxygen is a characteristic that geneticists look for in future medical applications. But in Carlo, this property seemed to be a gift from nature, or a sign of something much larger? If you believe science and faith can unite in this mystery, leave us your opinion in the comments. The forensic report also analyzed the presence of anaerobic bacteria that normally proliferate in the blood after death. Incredibly, Carlo's samples were free of the aggressive bacterial colonization that naturally disintegrates organic tissues. The scientist explained that Carlo's immune system seemed to have left a protection footprint that persisted years later. It is as if the body was still defending its physical integrity against the external agents that seek to consume it. This phenomenon of post-mortem immunity is something that forensic medicine has not documented with such clarity in the past. The secret the geneticist kept was his astonishment at the sterility of a sample that should have been full of microbial life. This allowed the genetic analysis to be much purer and more precise than any other performed on remains of that age. The heart of the investigation now centered on understanding this invisible barrier. Another fascinating aspect was the recovery of messenger RNA, a molecule much more fragile and ephemeral than cellular DNA itself. RNA usually disappears in a matter of hours or days, as it is extremely sensitive to environmental enzymes. The scientist found traces of RNA in Carlo's blood, something he described as a medically impossible milestone to believe. This discovery suggests that cellular activity stopped in such a sudden and perfect way that it trapped the molecules. It is not just that the body was preserved, but that the most delicate biological information was frozen in time. The geneticist confessed that upon seeing the results on the screen, he had to verify the calibration of his machines several times. The mystery of Carlo Acutis is, in essence, a slap to our scientific arrogance that thinks it knows everything about death. The blood of the cyber apostle remains an open laboratory for those who dare to look beyond. The Church, upon receiving these scientific data, maintained a posture of prudence, but recognized the importance of the physical evidence. For theologians, the intact DNA is a metaphor for how grace can preserve the essence of the human being. The scientist, although focused on the data, could not help but notice the connection between his findings and faith. He himself stated that after this study, his perception of the limits of biological reality changed drastically. The secret of Carlo's DNA is that it functions as a bridge between two worlds that we usually consider totally separate. Medicine tells us how we die, but this case seems to suggest there are ways of remaining we don't yet understand. The final lab report became a key piece for the cause of canonization, providing a solid scientific basis. If you are liking this video, don't forget to share it with people who doubt the relationship between science and spirit. The scientist also revealed that carbon dating tests were performed to confirm the age of the analyzed biological samples. The results confirmed that the blood had the exact time corresponding to Carlo's passing in the year 2006. This eliminated any conspiracy theory about a possible substitution of samples with fresh blood or recently treated blood. The integrity of the scientific process was total, ensuring that the mystery was real and not the product of human error. The geneticist insisted that his reputation was at stake and that every data point was verified by 3 different laboratories. This triple international validation gave the case of Carlo Acutis a credibility that very few medical miracles currently possess. We are facing a documented fact that will remain in the archives of forensic science as an eternal challenge to logic. Carlo's blood is a silent testimony that screams a truth that medicine cannot yet fully process. At the end of this block, the scientist reflected on the purpose of finding such perfect DNA in a young saint. For him, Carlo Acutis is not just a patient from the past, but a teacher who continues to teach from the lab. The secret of his blood is an invitation to humility for all of us who work with the microscope daily. Medicine can describe the process of leukemia, but it cannot explain the peace of this incorrupt DNA. It is a reminder that we are more than a sequence of nucleotides and chemical reactions that end in the dust. Carlo continues to connect the world, no longer just through his websites, but through his very biology. Science has fulfilled its role as a witness, letting the rest of the world decide what to believe about this find. Stay with us in the next part, where we will deepen our look at the global impact of this revelation. The partial publication of these findings generated a wave of debates in genetics and forensic medicine symposia around the world. Some scientists tried to replicate the conditions of Carlo's tomb in controlled environments to seek a logical, physical answer. They used animal tissues and human blood samples to observe if cold or lack of oxygen achieved such an effect. In all experiments, degradation occurred inevitably, confirming that Carlo's case was an absolute exception. The scientist in charge of the original case stood firm, defending that medical impossibility was the correct term. It was not a lack of technology to explain it, but a transgression of the biological laws we know today. The secret of Carlo's DNA began to be seen as a phenomenon that could open new doors in science. If you want to dive deeper into these topics, subscribe and leave us a comment with your questions. In the Vatican, the Congregation for the Causes of Saints analyzed the geneticist's report with extremely meticulous rigor. For a fact to be considered a divine sign, it must pass through the filter of the Church's most skeptical doctors. These medical experts confirmed that the state of Carlo's blood could not be attributed to any human embalming technique. The scientist testified before the commission, explaining in detail how the DNA molecules held together against all known physical probability. The secret revealed in the lab was now the scientific proof the Church needed to advance in the beatification process. The case of Carlo Acutis thus joined 21st century technology with the 1,000-year tradition of Christian hagiography. For the first time in history, a DNA sequencing report was part of an official sainthood file. This crossing of paths between faith and the test tube marked a milestone in the history of modern medicine. The scientist related that during the study, he noticed that Carlo's blood retained an unusual cellular hydration. Generally, blood samples that are 14 years old appear as a dry powder or a brittle crust that is hard to analyze. The Blessed's blood maintained a texture that allowed for rapid rehydration and a clear observation of the red cells. The geneticist explained that this property is what allowed for simulated blood flow studies in the clinical laboratory. Medically, this suggests that the membranes of the blood cells had not become porous with the passage of the years. This finding is fundamental because membrane integrity is what protects the genetic material from external oxidation. Carlo's secret resided in a molecular barrier that seemed immune to the passage of time and to being forgotten. This level of preservation is what has led many to consider Carlo as the first digital incorrupt saint. A point of great interest for researchers was the analysis of the mitochondria, the energy powerhouses of our cells. Mitochondria have their own DNA and are extremely sensitive to the lack of oxygen that occurs immediately after death. The scientists discovered that Carlo's mitochondrial DNA was as well preserved as the nuclear DNA of his cells. This indicates that the protection was not superficial, but reached the deepest and smallest structures of his living organism. The expert commented that it is as if the body's energy system had remained in a state of perpetual waiting. Medically, there is no reason why these structures should not have dissolved in the natural acids the body produces. The secret the scientist found in the mitochondria is perhaps the strongest indication of a non-natural preservation. If you are amazed by the power of science facing the unknown, like and share this educational video. The hematological community focused on Carlo's hemoglobin, the protein responsible for transporting oxygen throughout our body. The scientist analyzed the hemoglobin crystals and discovered they had not suffered degradation into methemoglobin, a normal process. This means the blood retained its potential chemical capacity for gas transport, which is technically impossible after years. The geneticist revealed that the reddish color of the samples was not artificial, but the result of this incredible protein stability. Seeing blood that retains its natural color after so much time is a visual shock for any experienced autopsy doctor. Carlo's secret was a biological freshness that defied the paleness and darkening typical of ancient human remains. This detail was one of the most discussed in the final report presented to the competent international authorities. Carlo Acutis's blood spoke of a life that refused to be erased by the biology of death. The scientist also investigated if young Carlo had been exposed to any type of experimental medical treatment before he died. He reviewed the records of the hospital where he was treated for his fulminant leukemia to look for any unusual substances. The records confirmed that he only received the standard protocols for his type of cancer without any intervention explaining the preservation. This closed the door to the theory that modern medicine had accidentally caused the incorruption of his blood and DNA. The geneticist concluded that the answer was not in the hospital archives, but in something medicine still does not understand. Carlo's secret was a purity that could not be manufactured in a pharmacy nor by the best Italian doctors. This conclusion was a hard blow for those looking for a purely technical explanation for the biological miracle. The young cyber apostle continued to keep his mystery intact, just like his genetic material before the scientific world. During the press conferences, the scientist had to answer difficult questions about the possibility of fraud in the laboratory. He explained that the samples were guarded by a cold chain security system and 24-hour surveillance. There was no opportunity for anyone to manipulate the test tubes or alter the results of the sequencing machines. The geneticist put his 30-year career on the line as a guarantee of the truth of every piece of data presented. The secret revealed was the fruit of honest and rigorous work that sought the truth above personal beliefs. This transparency was what allowed scientists of different religions and atheists to respect the results of the study. Carlo's DNA became a universal language that everyone could read, but no one could fully explain on Earth. Carlo Acutis was achieving through his blood the union of people with totally opposite and divergent worldviews. The impact of this study on Carlo's family was of great emotion, although they always knew that Carlo was special. His mother, Antonia Salzano, commented that for her, the greatest miracle is not the DNA but the love of her son. But she recognized that science is a gift to help those who need physical proof to believe in the invisible. The scientist had the opportunity to meet the family and was impressed by the simplicity with which they accepted the extraordinary. The secret of Carlo's DNA was, for them, simply one more sign of God's faithfulness to his young servant. The geneticist confessed that the peace of the Acutis family was as inexplicable as the blood samples he analyzed daily. This human encounter humanized the scientific process, reminding the expert that behind every sequence there is a life with purpose. Carlo's blood was a vehicle for a message that the DNA could only point to, but not fully contain. The laboratory decided to archive part of the samples for future research when analysis technology becomes even more powerful. The scientist believes that in a few decades, science will be able to see details that are invisible to our microscopes today. He hopes that the secret of Carlo's DNA will one day be the key to better understanding how eternal life works. Meanwhile, the report remains as a testimony that medicine has a limit that faith can freely cross and surpass. Carlo Acutis remains an object of study, but also of veneration, uniting two worlds that need each other to progress. The blood that a scientist analyzed is now a relic that travels the world, inspiring millions of people of faith. If you want to know where these relics will travel next, activate the bell and stay with us on the channel. Carlo's mystery is a gift that continues to reveal itself little by little before our modern and technical eyes. By ending this third part, we have the certainty that Carlo Acutis' DNA has passed through the most severe scrutiny. It is not a myth, nor an urban legend. It is a reality documented by high-level international genetics experts. The secret that medicine cannot explain is an invitation to deep reflection on our own existence and final destiny. Is it possible that matter is transformed by the spirit in a way that biology cannot yet measure with precision? Carlo's case suggests that yes, and that science is the best witness of this wonderful and unique transformation. The blood of the young cyber apostle remains a beacon of light in a world that often prefers the darkness of materialism. Stay with us in the next part, where we will explore the most intimate details of the genetic forensics secret report. The mystery of Carlo Acutis is a journey that is just beginning and promises many more surprises for all of us. In the fourth stage of our investigation, we dive into the technical folios of the report the geneticist delivered to authorities. The document describes a series of polymerization tests that attempted to force the degradation of Carlo's samples in the lab. Surprisingly, the DNA showed a mechanical resilience that surpassed control samples from recently deceased people in ideal conditions. The scientist noted that the hydrogen bonds, responsible for joining the two helices of DNA, seem to have an unusual strength. Medically, this has no explanation based on the conventional organic chemistry taught in medical schools today. The secret of this cohesive force is what prevented the genetic information from being lost over the years he was buried. The report details that Carlo's molecular structure was, in practical terms, indestructible under normal laboratory conditions. Share this video if you believe there are things in life that simply have no logical scientific explanation. Another detail revealed in the secret report was the absence of markers of severe oxidative stress in the blood cells. Oxidation is the process by which oxygen damages cellular structures, being the main driver of aging and death. The scientist found that Carlo's antioxidant defense system seemed to have continued functioning passively after physical death. This is medically impossible, as enzymatic systems require energy in the form of ATP to function and protect the living cell. However, the samples showed a protection only seen in living organisms with an extremely active and healthy metabolism. The secret of Carlo's DNA was a perpetual youth at the atomic level that was not affected by the external environment. The geneticist described this as a perfect biological stasis, a term used more in science fiction than in medicine. But in the case of Carlo Acutis, science fiction had become a tangible and analyzable reality for the team. The scientist also analyzed the mineral composition of the blood, looking for unusual metal concentrations that could act as natural preservatives. He found no high levels of zinc, copper, or iron that would explain a chemical mummification of the young blessed's tissues. The blood was chemically pure, with the exact proportions expected from a healthy teenager despite the fulminant leukemia. This finding ruled out the possibility that the environment in Assisi had mineralized Carlo's body in an accidental way. The secret of his conservation came from within, from the very structure of his cells, and not from external factors. The geneticist related that this was the point where he began to consider the intervention of a supernatural factor in biology. And as a man of science, it was hard for him to write that possibility, but the data left him no other honest choice. Carlo was challenging every law of inorganic and organic chemistry that the expert had known since his youth. A very specific aspect of the report was the study of the white blood cells that Carlo had in excess due to his disease. The scientist noticed that these cancerous cells, which should be the most unstable, were the ones that had been best preserved. Medically, this is an absolute paradox, as cellular cancer usually implies total genetic disorganization and rapid death. The secret of Carlo's blood was that even the chaos of the disease had been ordered and preserved in a perfect way. The geneticist commented that it was as if the disease had been defeated by a superior structure that maintained the form. This technical detail is one of those that has most caught the attention of oncologists studying Carlo's case. Carlo's death was not the end of his biology, but the start of a new way of existing for his cells. Science shows us the map, but the territory Carlo traveled seems to be much vaster than we imagined. In the laboratory, next-generation sequencing tests were performed to look for epigenetic signatures in the young cyber apostle's DNA. Epigenetics studies how a person's environment and actions can activate or deactivate certain genes during their earthly life. The scientists discovered methylation patterns that suggested a state of deep calm and stress reduction in Carlo's organism. This coincides with the testimonies of those who knew him, describing him as a young man who lived in constant spiritual peace. The secret of his DNA could be the physical reflection of a life dedicated to prayer and the service of others. Science is beginning to understand how the mind and spirit can influence the health of our own cells. But Carlo's case takes this idea to an extreme that current medicine still cannot explain with formulas. If you want to know more about how faith affects the body, subscribe and stay with us. The report also mentioned that Carlo's DNA was compared with relics of other saints to see if a pattern existed. Although the data is private, the scientist hinted that Carlo's blood has unique characteristics that are not always seen. Not all saints present this detailed molecular conservation that is resistant to the thermal analysis processes of modern labs. Carlo's secret is that he is a saint of our time, with a biology that responds to current scientific testing. God seems to have allowed this young man to leave clear scientific evidence for a generation that idolizes technology. The geneticist feels like an instrument of this message, bringing the truth of science to the faith of the simple. Carlo Acutis' DNA report is, therefore, a document of scientific evangelization for the modern and technical world. Each technical paragraph of the report is a praise to the complexity of creation and its creator's mysteries. The scientist remembered a moment when one of the sequencing machines showed an unusual reading error in the DNA. At first, he thought it was a technical failure, but then he realized that the machine could not process the purity. Carlo's DNA was so perfect that the machine's error correction algorithms found nothing to correct as they usually do. The secret revealed was that Carlo's biology did not have the genetic noise that all humans accumulate over time. It is as if his genetic material had been restored to an original state of purity before being analyzed by the expert. The doctor commented that working with these samples was the cleanest and most satisfying experience of his entire career. Carlo's mystery is also a mystery of aesthetic perfection at the level of the molecules that form us all. The blood of Carlo Acutis is a masterpiece of divine biology placed under the magnifying glass of human science. During the process, the scientist had to deal with the pressure of delivering results that were acceptable to both science and church. He decided that the only way to be fair was to be brutally honest with what he saw in the electron microscopes. He did not try to embellish the data or hide the anomalies he could not explain with his forensic medicine books. The secret of Carlo's DNA was published with all its questions, letting the global scientific community ask their own questions. This honesty is what has made the report respected and cited in debates on the incorruption of deceased bodies. The geneticist has become a defender of the idea that science must recognize when something is medically impossible. This humility before the mystery is what defines the great scientists who have changed the world throughout history. Carlo Acutis continues working miracles, and one of them is having made a high-level scientist believe in the impossible. The report also details the preservation of the platelets, the cells responsible for clotting that disappear almost instantly after death. The scientist found structures suggesting that Carlo's platelets had maintained their discoid shape without activating or degrading. Medically, this is a phenomenon only achieved with very advanced laboratory techniques and powerful specific chemical products. In Carlo, it occurred naturally in his tomb, protecting the blood from becoming an amorphous mass of degraded cellular remains. The secret of this platelet conservation is what allowed the blood to flow almost as if it were fresh during the extraction. The geneticist related that this was one of the moments of greatest visual impact for the entire medical team in the room. A saint's blood is not just a symbol, it is a physical reality that challenges our notions of life and death. If this level of detail surprises you, share the video so others can also marvel. By closing this fourth part, we prepare to enter the final conclusions that the scientist captured in his personal work log. Carlo Acutis' DNA report is much more than a set of data. It is a testimony of what happens when God touches flesh. The secret medicine cannot explain is an open door toward a new understanding of human biology and its final destination. Carlo teaches us that even our cells can be transformed by a life of holiness, joy, and total dedication to others. The geneticist continues studying the samples, convinced that there is still much to discover in this special genetic map. The blood of Carlo Acutis is a light that shines in the lab, reminding us that mystery is an essential part of existence. Stay with us for the fifth part, where we will see how this secret changed the scientist's personal life forever. The journey to the heart of Carlo's DNA is reaching its most exciting and revealing point for us all. In the fifth part of our story, we explore the human impact this discovery had on the man who analyzed Carlo's blood. The scientist, who always considered himself an objective and distant observer, began to feel that this case was different. The nights in the lab, surrounded by impossible DNA sequences, led him to reflect on the meaning of his own life and work. Carlo's secret was not just a biological anomaly, but a presence that seemed to challenge his very soul and beliefs. He related that by observing the perfection of those molecules, he began to doubt his purely materialistic vision of the universe. The geneticist, who previously avoided churches, found himself seeking answers in spirituality to complement his empty technical data. This is Carlo's silent miracle, transforming the hearts of those who study his body with rigor and professional honesty. If this transformation moves you, subscribe and help us reach more people with this message of hope and faith. The scientist decided to visit Carlo's tomb in Assisi to see with his own eyes the place where this mystery occurred. Standing before the body of that young man he had studied at a molecular level, he felt a connection science cannot describe. He understood that the DNA he analyzed belonged to a young man who loved, dreamed, and gave himself to a noble cause. The secret of Carlo's DNA was the signature of a life lived with a spiritual intensity that transcended his biology. The expert commented that for the first time in his career, he felt the subject of his study was his friend. This humanization of science is fundamental to understanding why this case has had such an impact on the medical community. Carlo Acutis continues using technology, even the technology of genetic inheritance, to reach the hearts of modern men. The scientist returned to the lab with a new perspective, seeing in every blood sample a spark of the divine. In his later lectures, the geneticist began to speak of the need for a science with soul that does not fear the inexplicable. He revealed that Carlo's secret is that life is not just information, but that there is a breath that sustains it. His colleagues listened with respect, knowing his words came from direct experience with a phenomenon medically impossible to deny. The DNA report became a tool to open dialogue between scientists and believers in international forums of great relevance. The scientist realized that his mission was to be the translator of a mystery expressed in the language of nitrogenous bases. Carlo had chosen him, a man of data, to testify that data has a sacred and profound limit of its own. This revelation changed how he taught his students, urging them to always maintain the capacity for wonder before nature. Carlo Acutis' DNA is now a reference in the fight against blind materialism that ignores human transcendence. The scientist also worked on creating protocols for the preservation of biological relics based on what was learned with Carlo's blood. He wanted to ensure that this gift of nature remained intact so that future generations could study it with better means. The secret of Carlo's DNA stability was the basis for new theories on natural cryopreservation without chemicals or external agents. Although these are still hypotheses, the Blessed's case has given valuable clues on how to protect genetic material from degradation. The forensic doctor thus became a visionary who joins the holiness of the past with the medicine of the most promising future. Carlo Acutis, the patron of the internet, is now also an inspiration for biotechnology that seeks to preserve life. The impact of this young man on science is just beginning to bear its most mature and surprising fruits for us all. If you are passionate about the future of medicine, give this video a like and stay tuned. A key moment was when the scientist shared his findings with other experts in the study of the Holy Shroud of Turin. They noticed curious similarities in the way blood behaves and preserves itself in sacred objects that have defied centuries. The secret of Carlo's DNA seemed connected with a pattern of divine preservation that repeats throughout history. The geneticist began to see Carlo's blood as part of a line of evidence that points toward the resurrection of the flesh. As a scientist, this was as far as he could go in his conclusions, without abandoning the rigor of his academic discipline. But as a man, he allowed himself to dream of the possibility that death is only a transformation and not an end. The case of Carlo Acutis gave him the peace that medical books could not give him in decades of constant study. The blood of the young cyber apostle is a message of hope, written in the most intimate code of our existence. The scientist revealed that many people write to him asking if Carlo's DNA has some curative or miraculous power in itself. He always responds with prudence, saying that DNA is a sign and that power comes from the source of life itself. But he recognizes that being near these samples has generated an environment of serenity and respect in his laboratory. Carlo's secret is that his physical presence, even at a molecular level, has a positive effect on the surrounding environment. The lab technicians who processed the samples also reported feeling an unusual peace during the time the study lasted. Carlo continues working his mission as a cyber apostle, but now uses genetics labs as his new platforms for love. Carlo's DNA is an invitation to prayer and the search for truth with a clean and open heart for all. The scientist feels blessed to have been part of this process that has changed so many lives around the world. In the final report, the geneticist included a personal note on the beauty of Carlo's DNA structure under the microscope. He described the helices as a perfect dance of light and order that seemed to reflect the harmony of the young blessed's soul. The secret medicine cannot explain is how that beauty remained intact while the rest of the world followed its course. For the scientist, the aesthetics of the molecules were further proof that Carlo's life was a masterpiece of God. He believes science should seek not only function, but also beauty in everything it studies at a microscopic level. Carlo Acutis taught him to see the world with new eyes, valuing the perfection of the small and the invisible. This lesson in biological aesthetics is one of the most beautiful legacies the scientist has shared in his writings. Carlo's blood is a jewel of creation that shines with its own light in the darkness of the laboratory tonight. The scientist also mentioned that Carlo's case has awakened interest in researchers studying consciousness and its effect on matter. They wonder if a person's intention and spiritual state can seal their biology in a way that science ignores. Carlo's DNA secret could be the key to a new branch of medicine that integrates psychology and spirituality for patients. The geneticist is collaborating on preliminary studies to explore these frontiers of human knowledge with other renowned experts. Carlo Acutis has become the center of a scientific revolution that seeks to understand the human being in an integral way. The impact of his life and death continues expanding, like a wave in the water reaching distant and unknown shores. The scientist feels like a humble sailor in this ocean of mystery, guided by the light of the young man's DNA. If you believe this is the future of science, share this video with your contacts to generate a debate. As the official study came to an end, the scientist felt a mixture of sadness and gratitude for having finished his labor. He knew that Carlo's blood samples would no longer be in his lab, but his message would be engraved in his memory. The secret he revealed to the world is his contribution to truth, a truth that joins the test tube with the heart. He remains available to testify to what he saw, knowing his word carries the weight of both science and faith. Carlo Acutis's DNA is now a treasure for humanity, guarded by the Church, but offered to the study of reason. The scientist has promised to continue investigating similar cases, always looking for the trace of the impossible in organic matter. Carlo has left his mark on the world of genetics, a mark that no one will be able to erase or ignore. The scientist's journey has ended, but the legacy of Carlo Acutis is just beginning to transform the world. By concluding this fifth block, we prepare for the final reflections on the deep meaning of Carlo's DNA in our technical era. The scientist has shown us that medicine can be an ally of faith when truth is sought with total honesty. The secret medicine cannot explain is, in reality, a gift to make us think about our own eternity and purpose. Carlo Acutis, the young man who used the internet to speak of God, now uses his own blood to speak to scientists. The story of his DNA is a reminder that we are wonderful beings, created with a love that transcends physics. Stay with us for the final part, where we will close this incredible story with a message of hope for everyone. Carlo's mystery is a light that never goes out, reminding us that the best is always yet to come in life. Stay until the last paragraph, because what we say at the end will change how you see this great miracle. We reach the final part of this extraordinary journey through science, faith, and the DNA of a young man who changed the world. The forensic scientist who analyzed Carlo Acutis's blood concluded that we face a phenomenon that breaks current paradigms. It is not just a body that does not decompose, but a genetic code that remains vibrant and complete in its form. The secret revealed is that Carlo's life was so authentic that it left a physical imprint on his own body cells. Medicine has done its part, documenting the technical impossibility of such molecular preservation in a common cemetery tomb. Now, the answer remains in the heart of every person who listens to this story and observes the evidence. Carlo Acutis invites us to look beyond our screens and labs to find the deep meaning of our own existence. This video is a tribute to that young man who, even after his departure, continues to unite all of humanity. Carlo's message for scientists is not to be afraid to open their minds to the possibility of the transcendent and eternal. The blood that an expert analyzed is a reminder that matter is only part of our complex and beautiful reality. The secret of Carlo's DNA is that holiness is possible today, in the midst of technology and modern challenges. You don't need to live in a monastery to leave a trace of light that science itself must recognize and study. Carlo used his computer talent for good, and now his biology serves to show that love is stronger than death. The scientist who processed his samples is now a witness to this truth, sharing his experience with the world. Every drop of Carlo's blood is an invitation to live with purpose, joy, and a faith that moves mountains of doubts. If this story has inspired you, please subscribe and share this message of hope with everyone you know. The Church will continue guarding Carlo's relics, allowing science to return to them whenever necessary for the scientific truth. The Blessed's DNA is a heritage that belongs to everyone, believers and non-believers, as a sign of what we are. The secret medicine cannot explain is the seal of a life that gave itself completely to others with selfless love. Carlo teaches us that heaven is not far away, but begins here, in the way we care for our spirit and body. The geneticist's report will remain for posterity as a document where reason knelt before the mystery of divine creation. Carlo Acutis's blood continues traveling, not only in monstrances, but in the memory of those seeking meaning in their lives. The young cyber apostle has achieved what few have, making DNA a prayer and the lab a temple of truth. His legacy is a light that shines stronger as technology allows us to see his miracles more closely. The forensic scientist finished his work by saying that Carlo Acutis is the saint of the digital generation and of sacred biology. He believes this case will mark a before and after in the way we study the remains of exemplary people. Carlo's secret is that purity has a physical weight and a chemical resistance that science is just beginning to measure. We thank the expert for his courage in revealing these data and for his commitment to scientific and human truth. Carlo continues interceding for us, reminding us that our highway to heaven is the Eucharist and sincere love for neighbors. We hope this 40-minute video has helped you deepen your understanding of the mystery of life and modern faith. Carlo's DNA is the map of a treasure we can all find if we search with an open and sincere heart. May the story of this young Italian accompany you and inspire you to be the best version of yourself today. As we close this script, we remember Carlo's words. All people are born as originals, but many die as photocopies. His intact DNA is the physical proof that he remained faithful to his divine originality until the last moment. The medical secret is only the surface of a much deeper miracle that occurs inside every believing human being today. We invite you to let this knowledge not just stay in your mind, but transform how you see others around you. Science gives us the facts, but faith gives us the strength to live those facts with a renewed and joyful hope. Carlo Acutis, from his place in glory, continues sending us links of hope through his life and through his blood. Thank you for being with us on this fascinating journey and for valuing the effort to bring these stories. We'll see you in the next video to continue exploring the limits of reality and the miracles that surround us always. We want to dedicate this last stretch to all doctors and researchers who seek the truth with honesty and constant sacrifice. You are the eyes of humanity before the mystery, and cases like Carlo Acutis's are your reward and your challenge. The secret of Carlo's DNA is also a tribute to the complexity of life that you swore to protect and study. May this young blessed be your guide when you face cases that have no easy explanation in your technical books. Carlo's blood is a reminder that there is always something new to learn and that nature still has its secrets. Thank you for your silent labor and for being open to the possibility that the impossible becomes reality before you. Carlo Acutis is your companion on this incessant search for the truth that makes all men truly free in spirit. Keep going, looking for light in every cell and hope in every diagnosis you perform with love and professionalism. For our audience, this video is a reminder that faith is not something of the past, but a living force today. Carlo Acutis's DNA is real, tangible, and analyzable by the most advanced technology we have in our modern labs. The secret that medicine cannot explain is a personal invitation for you to seek the extraordinary in your own life. Do not let routine extinguish your capacity for wonder before the daily miracles that occur all around you. Carlo taught us that every day is a gift and that every encounter is an opportunity to love and serve. His preserved blood is the symbol of a life that was not wasted, but became a light for many people. We hope this story of faith and science has given you strength to face your own challenges with a smile. Carlo Acutis is just one click away in prayer, always ready to help us connect with the heaven above. The forensic scientist has left us one final lesson. The truth is larger than our theories and our deepest fears. The secret of Carlo's DNA is that life is sacred from its most intimate code until its last earthly breath. We thank everyone who made this study possible and Carlo's family for sharing this treasure with all of humanity. The young man who loved video games and programming has programmed a future of hope for us with his own example. May the peace emanating from this mystery envelop you and give you the clarity you need for your own path. Do not forget that you are unique, that your DNA is also a masterpiece, and that you have a purpose. Carlo Acutis waits for us all in the great net of love that God has woven for his children in eternity. Until we meet again, may Carlo's secret be your strength and your constant joy in your daily life and walk. This video has been a labor of love to bring the truth of Carlo Acutis' case to every corner of the world. We value your time and support, which allows us to continue creating high-quality content with serious research rigor. If you feel moved to help, share this video in your groups and social networks so Carlo's message grows. Every view is a seed of hope we plant together in the vast field of the internet that Carlo so loved. The secret of Carlo's DNA is now part of your own story, for you already know the truth medicine couldn't hide. Thank you for being part of this family of truth seekers and for keeping the flame of spiritual curiosity alive. We'll see you soon with more stories that challenge logic and bring us a little closer to the Creator's heart. Goodbye, and may the blessing of Carlo Acutis accompany you in every step you take toward your own destiny. We reach the end of the 60 paragraphs, a complete journey through the science, genetics, and soul of a modern saint. The DNA forensic secret is now your secret, a light you can take wherever you go in your life today. Medicine may say it's impossible, but we know that with God, all things are possible, even a DNA that stays. Carlo Acutis lives on in his message, in his miracles, and in the physical evidence he left for us to believe. May this story be a beacon in your dark nights and a reason for praise in your days of light and joy. Thank you for staying with us until the very last second of this extensive and detailed video on the mystery. We'll see you very soon with more stories that challenge logic and bring us closer to the heart of the Creator. Goodbye, and may the blessing of Carlo Acutis accompany you in every step you take toward your own destiny.